So Elliot Lindsley talked earlier about the architecture and how this building was constructed in 1901, the third Grace Church in Millbrook, after the first was burned down by a disgruntled parishioner. It's a whole story there. And, one of those sermons that went wrong, or no, they were living in the same boarding house. It was a fortunate fire because Millbrook was built in the intervening years between 1867, the first, and the 1870, the second Grace Church. In those 4 years, Millbrook was laid out and became a village. It used to be Merritt's Farm. And so the second Grace Church was built down in the center on Church Street, where now resides a parking lot across from the DMV and Nooch's and so on. So that was then Grace Church, but in 1901, actually earlier in the 60s and 70s, John D. Wing had come back from making his fortune out west. He grew up here as part of the Quaker community, the Wing family being prominent in Wingdale and so on. Went to school at the Friends Boarding School that was near Nine Partners. Went off to San Francisco to make his fortune. Started well, came back, became very wealthy in a chemical import business. And that was located in New York City, but he remembered old Millbrook, and he bought the old boarding school, and he built San Donona, the mansion up right behind us on the hill. It's now gone. It's within living memory was there. Although the name San Donona, Land of Light and Shadows or something, was later used for the hunting ground, the shooting grounds that his son set up later on, Morgan Wing. But Mr. Wing, John D., and his wife Adelaide became Episcopalians. He had been a Quaker, but Adelaide must have been an Episcopalian because they joined that first church and had given some of the windows. Two of the windows that you see, if you go up into the chancel, on the two corners are from that first church. Or actually, no, those were all destroyed in the fire. Those two windows are what remained from the second church. When they gave the land and the money to build this in 1901, Abner Haydel, the architect that he had hired, a young man from Louisiana who had studied Beaux-Arts, and went and designed some fancy residences for wealthy people, but this was the only church we know of. And as Elliot said in his earlier talk, it must have been influenced by the rector. The idea being it was influenced by the arts and crafts movement then prevalent in England. And John D. Wing's business often took him there, so he must have wanted an English-style arts and crafts building. So you see all the panels, for instance, have different designs in their masonry, in their bricklaying pattern, showing the craftsmanship between the half timbers. And also it's built, with the truss system that's traditional in many churches. Originally, the altar was against the wall with a reredos in wood above it, and this faces due south. So in the morning, the light would be rather bright through those three windows at top. All the windows when it was built were this diamond pane opaque windows that you see there. But Mrs. Wing didn't like the sun in her eyes, so she commissioned those three windows there, and they represent three archangels, Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael. And according to Elliot, they're from Germany. So they were brought and put in along with the two that came from the old church first. The rest, no other windows were here at the beginning. It was all like that. But the window that we just saw behind the font, which is, by the way, cast in concrete as part of that floor, so it's not movable, the original design. It was put in 1907. The daughter of one of the children the daughter of one of the Wing children died age 8, and that was given. And then in 1910, John D. Wing died. In 1911, his wife Adelaide. And in 1912, the window that you can't see because it's behind the organ was commissioned and installed, dedicated and blessed on Easter in 1912, according to Millbrook Roundtable. And what happened was that was a gorgeous window by the same artist who did the rose window, a man named Maitland Armstrong, who, if you ever learn anything about stained glass, you'll realize is an unsung master with the rank of John Lafarge and Tiffany, because they were all contemporaries. In fact, they were friends. There's a whole story behind Maitland Armstrong. He grew up in Newburgh. His parents made him study law, and off he goes to Europe, where he's consul to the Vatican and later to the newly formed Italian state. Well, his job at that point, to some extent, was welcoming artists doing the grand tour, sort of like Tricia back in the day. And he got to know the art scene. He was an artist. He loved to draw, and he came home. He dropped the law and worked with Tiffany and learned to stain glass. Set up his own shop, and down in the city near Greenwich Village. It's an NYU building now and still preserved. His work was incredible because, like Tiffany and Lafarge, he used many different layers of stained glass to draw the picture and make the colors. So the masterpiece that's behind the organ, if you look at it from the outside during the day, looks mostly blue and white. That's because that's the inside. We've turned it around to face outside. The first layer of glass. And upon that are different layers held on by a sort of an elaborate system of leading and grommets and wire. And we only learned all that when we decided to take it out, clean it up, conserve it because it needed conserving, and then reinstall it having turned it around, which we reinstalled and then dedicated last year when the Bishop Hyde was here on July 23rd. And so during that process, we actually found the signature of Maitland Armstrong's daughter, Helen, who was his partner and who did all the faces. And in fact, that work there, St. Martin holding the sword and dividing his cape, is pretty much by her because it's a late date. He died just around that time. She was taking over the business. And she was the artist who did all the hands and the faces for his work. But she wasn't, and the moment had passed for the multicolored and layers stained glass. This goes back to a Gothic style where it's mostly drawn on glass. Like this other piece here is a piece from England by the Lamb Studio, a Victorian piece put in here in 1913. So in a way, they've gone back from the American Renaissance of Tiffany and Lafarge style where the picture is made by the colors, to more traditional etched and stained glass. That piece is given in memory of Lloyd Wing, so this came later. So we had those pieces, and that was in memory of somebody else. And this wall was just the clear diamond glass until the 1950s, when there was another wave of enthusiasm for doing stained glass and for other alterations. So during the 50s and 60s was when it was an ecclesial architectural reform movement. The altars were moved out from the wall, turned around, so the priest wasn't facing away from the congregation, but behind the altar, facing the congregation. The woodwork, you see some remnant actually is in the parish hall, and there used to be elaborate woodwork back there. The choir used to sit on both sides with the altar in the back and the organ here. But then in 1968, this was all rearranged and the new organ was installed in dedication to the music teacher of many years here and the organist. It was an elaborate work by the German organ maker Beckerath, a post-World War organ maker, who came on site, he and his team, and it was all made in Germany and then brought here piece by piece and assembled. It's quite a beautiful thing, and it is one of the best organs in our area, especially for Baroque music. It's an extraordinary organ. There'll be a demonstration by our organist, Suzanne McDonald, tomorrow. But that organ, of course, completely obscured the great stained glass. But now it helps us because having turned it around, we can put a sheet behind the back and we can bounce LED lights off. And at night, as the sun stops reflecting off the blue layers, what you'll see is that the multi-colors come through as the sun, as the night grows, and it glows with the original color. It's a beautiful thing. There's other glass back there, but let me talk a little bit about these. Zoe. This is my dog, Zoe. It's not even close to that time. You lie down. So the glass here was done in the 50s, maybe up to the early 60s, by a man named Len Howard, who was British but settled in Kent, Connecticut, and started a stained glass studio post-World War II. Did a number of wonderful pieces in some schools around this area. And what's kind of unique, they're not really a sequence. Each one of them has sort of a different saint or pictures Jesus in different ways. Suffer the children to come unto me. He's in remembrance at Last Supper. He's calming the water there. And there's a Saint Luke and Saint Francis in the center. But unusually, there's Abraham Lincoln at the end, which is unusual for stained glass windows in churches, of course, and was somewhat controversial. Politics and civil rights being, something that was brought up. But I'm proud that we have it. It represents, of course, a secular saint here. And then the other stained glass that we won't go we can walk up to later is in the back on both sides of the rear part of the church. Again, partly done in relationship to the organ. One is Saint Cecilia, who is the patron saint of music. Another is there's Saint Gregory, who invented the Gregorian chant, so music on that side. And on the right, a work of Jesus the Carpenter, given in memory of Howard Seibert, whose daughter's funeral was yesterday, actually. And she told me that he was such a good craftsman and a handyman that they thought the carpenter motif was best. Next to that is the only old piece of stained glass we have in this church, and it's actually a 14th century piece of beautiful medieval European stained glass, a nice work, probably German, that was bought from the Hearst estate when it was liquidated after his estate in the Great Sale in Macy's circa 1950 or whatever, and then installed. So that's all the glass we have at the moment, although we have raised some money and we intend to create stained glass in honor of Charles Buddy Johnson, who was a member here, a young man, African-American, outstanding athlete and musician, but for racist reason was denied a scholarship and drafted into Korea, where he was part of one of the first interracial platoons during a battle with the Chinese army in Korea. His platoon, his unit was overrun, and he went out repeatedly into the firefight and carried 8 people to safety, being killed himself in the process. So he was denied a medal at first, again, probably a racist captain, but he ended up, hey, come on in if you're interested. Okay. He was denied, a medal at first, but he's been recently reconsidered and awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. So we want to put a window for him and for Jonathan Daniels, who was an Episcopal seminarian in the 1960s, who went down on the Freedom bus to help enlist black voters in the South and was shot in Alabama defending a young woman, Ruby Sales, in a store. So we want to put a couple of more windows and secular saints, and maybe Eleanor Roosevelt, and maybe Pauli Murray, this African-American woman who became a lawyer, argued for the Brown versus Board of Ed, was part of that team, developed the argument that Rose Ginsburg used for women's equality, and then became an Episcopal priest, remarkable woman, and so on. So we're in the design process. We think things are always added, like the statue and hopefully windows, to the sacred architecture while blending in and making this place a continuing holy place. That brings me to the fabrics, which I was not really a fabric person, I have to admit. I didn't know much about it. But one day we were replacing one of our frontals, and it fell into the box that we hold our frontals, and I had to go in and dig it out, and I found a box. And in the box was a frontal we weren't using because the satin backing was stained. But on the middle was this. So this beautiful emblem, happened to be the same thing as I saw in a newspaper article from 1954, dated December 10th, 1954, that featured the people who made it. And those people are well known to some local citizen. Here's the article, and this is the picture of the women. And you see on one side Sally Gifford O'Brien, who lived locally and was a talented artist in her own right, and Erica Wilson, who went on to become quite famous in needlework circles. But she was brought here by Margaret Thorne Parshall, who was, had been part of the Needlework Guild, and brought her over from the Royal School of Needlework in England when she was a young woman. And so from 1953-54 through about 4 or 5 years, I think she was here to 57, she married a furniture designer, moved to New York City, opened a shop on Madison Avenue, later Nantucket and Palm Beach. There you go, Vladimir Kagan, a well-known furniture designer.
Yes.
And so she had a remarkable career post-Millbrook, but we have the distinction of starting her off. And the work they did as a needlework guild is superlative. You see here the piece that was their first piece, this emblem. And, each of these pieces, in this case, the frontal is full length. It goes all the way down. So the emblem, which will be reattached to a new silk frontal, and dedicated in December, along with the embries that came with the original. And the additional hangings that go, for instance, at the lectern and the pulpit, this gives you some idea of the quality of the work, and I'll pass them around. You have the symbol IHS, which is Greek letters for Jesus, IES, but you see them, how beautiful they are. And you can take a look, and the quality of the work, is outstanding. We have pieces, we have whole sets, frontal and hangings, along with the burse, and this is the pall that goes over the setting for the communion set. So, for instance. This is the green set, and you see this is kind of unusual. It has of course, a cross with a circle like a Celtic cross, but it has a Trinitarian set of circles. And again, this is an original design that I haven't seen elsewhere. A little bit modern, a little bit different, and sort of fun. This is also kind of funky, and if you came up here, you'd see this phoenix. I can't really take it out to show the camera, but maybe later we can see it. But there's a phoenix emblem on the center of this frontal, which is somewhat in the design, a little bit. You see the 50s and 60s mid-modern sort of motif. And I don't think I've seen a phoenix frontal before. So those who like Dumbledore's pet, would really appreciate that. We've used it as the frontal for the last 2 days' funerals, and it's really wonderful to have. We have then the red set, the green set, the purple Lenten set, which is also appropriate for funerals, and a few other pieces, but extraordinary. But the needlework sort of artwork that didn't stop with that group. It sort of revived in the 80s and 90s in terms of needlework on the cushions. So, for instance, after all this was brought down, and this beautiful, rail carved with each of the evangelists, and a local artisan, Dirk Russ, whose widow is still with us, was here yesterday, carved the rail and the top of the side chapel hair and the ombre, and did the cross. So we've been a beneficiary of local crafts and beautiful work, including the needlework on these kneelers. For instance, here, Chris Hunter, who was a local artist, did many of these designs, as well as Sally Gifford O'Brien's and others. And we had a group that was doing this work for some time. And if you're free later to walk about, you'll see there's just, gorgeous pieces all over. And, many of them have these fun motifs, such as the bounty and the rainbow showing Noah's covenant with all creation. We have Holy Spirit descending, here at the bishop's chair. And so this one here is featured in an article recently published in local paper describing the visit of Mariana Clayman. So after finding this set of needlework, I saw an article about this woman, Mariana Clayman, who was a conservator and had worked in the Met and so on, but retired and has a project called Sacristies of New York. So she's cataloging many beautiful needlework examples throughout the sanctuary. She's an expert on where they come from, often communities of nuns, sometimes professional organizations like Whipple in England and so on. But she was saying, as far as parish needlework guilds, you have exceptional pieces. And this I think was designed, the design was Chris Hunter, now Gerby. She's down in Virginia, still active as an artist. So those are some of the treasures of our church, and I would welcome any questions.
I have a question about the big window. Is sunset the only time you can really see it?
Well, all night, like we have the lights go on at 4 and we stop at about 1 or 12 or, but during the evening. Okay. And for those who are nimble, you're welcome to join me in a ladder. You can walk up to behind the organ, if you don't mind close rungs on German ladders. If you're interested, you can take a tour and get right to it. It's pretty cool.
I had to ask several times, and finally understood it, that stained glass is meant to be viewed from the inside. And they kept saying, we're going to turn it around. And I finally got it.
Well, you can't see the detail of the faces and other things, especially multi-layer, from only one side, from the outside. Now, the actual subject of the window that's called the Resurrection Window in the Millbrook Roundtable in 1912 is Jesus and Mary Magdalene in the garden after the resurrection, in the famous scene from John chapter 20, where he says, she thinks he's the gardener at first, and he says, Mary, and she goes, Rabboni, my rabbi, I recognize you, and she reaches out to hold him, and he says, you can't hold on, I haven't yet ascended to my Father. And that moment is often depicted in stained glass, but usually he's going like this, and she sort of cowers and like, okay, I can't hold on. But this, in the only instance I know and our expert, Brianne Van Voorst of Liberty Stained Glass, and she was like, I don't think that, but it is that scene, but it's so unusual because they're both standing, they're holding hands, and he's sort of, I've got to go to work, I'm on my way. And we think it's a tribute to the 50-year marriage of John D. and Adelaide Wing by their children, that they would present Jesus and Mary in that way. Another question? Cool stuff, huh? Yeah.
How are you finding the silk for the new?
How am I what?
How are you finding the silk for the new pieces that you made for the?
Well, we went to Almies, is a company that specializes in ecclesiastical, fabrics and stuff. So it's where people like me get our shirts, and you can order your altar. And you give them, and there's a whole set of terms that you've never heard of that you suddenly have to orphreys and tassels and things, but they'll make it. So they did make one for us. We have it, but we haven't yet.
Someone's got your hands.
So Linda Boise and Susan Nessler are our seamstresses. They've taken it on with some trepidation, but we have Mariana who's helping us talk through it. Are you a seamstress?
No.
Just checking. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, thanks. I think that's all I have to
Thank you.
say on that. Any questions for you? What time is it? Is that it? Okay. Still an hour to go for you.